Let's take you back to the Netherlands, just outside the Peace Palace. Zane Dangor, who of course is the Director General for the International Relations Department here at home, is just addressing international media. Let's listen in.
Necessary for a group to sustain life, which is essentially at the core of the Genocide Convention. Some of the specificities, when we made our first application in December, and we followed that up with our oral pleadings, we were very clear in how we looked at October 7th. We were very clear in our application that while we recognize under the Geneva Conventions, especially Protocol 1 of the 1977 Geneva Convention, that oppressed people have the right to use force. They cannot target civilians. Targeting of civilians is a war crime. And it's for that reason, shortly after October 7th, we approached the International Criminal Court to ask for both Hamas and those involved in the armed attacks to be investigated for war crimes under that Geneva Convention Protocol 1, but also in terms of the Rome Statute. We also asked for, of course, for Israel to be investigated for war crimes. And in the case of Israel, also because of genocide, because of the unfolding genocide. So to argue that we are here again, as they did in January on behest of Hamas, is completely false. They then refer to a conference that took place in South Africa. It was a civil society conference. That civil society conference expressly invited civil society people that had nothing to do with government, and it included civil society formations from Palestine, including from the Palestinian Authority, where there's a section dealing with anti-apartheid and an anti-apartheid conference. So to suggest, as they did, that this was a government hosting of Hamas is completely false. And we just needed to clearly rebut that. I want to go back to the Geneva Protocols and just to put the context for how South Africa approaches this. South Africa has got a liberation movement, not government, that signed the Geneva Protocol of 1977. In 1948, with that liberation movement is subsequently become the majority governing party. And in 1948, they voluntarily signed to adhere to all the prescripts of that Geneva Convention that they will not target civilians. That is something that has crept into how government approaches these things. So we are signatories to the Geneva Conventions. I must point out that Israel is not a signatory to that very same Geneva Convention. They've recognized that they may have some obligations under international customary law, but essentially they are not adherents to the Geneva Conventions. That we hope that now that they are mentioning it, will find themselves bound to it, given that international customary law is binding too. And important, Article 75 of that convention prohibits expressly, as a war crime, collective punishment. It prohibits expressly, as a war crime, torture. And we've seen that happening in the current context. So if they want to point out to the war crimes perpetrated by Hamas, then clearly they must see that what they're doing is a war crime. And it's more serious in their case because they are state and bound by various obligations as a state, even if they are not a party to the Geneva Conventions, particularly Protocol 1 and Protocol 2 of 77. So I wanted to clarify that, and hopefully the other issue that I think we need to touch on is the unconditional release of hostages. On the steps here, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, when the court made the judgment in January, expressly agreed and stated that the hostages must be released unconditionally. We have made that expressly clear in various statements as well, because we recognize, in terms of that very same Geneva Convention 75 that we hold dearly, that hostage-taking breaches the Geneva Convention. But that also then includes the unlawful detention of Palestinians without trial, thousands of them, which is tantamount to hostage-taking. So we call for that for Palestinians who are arrested without, it's essentially what we call detention without trial, that it's essentially tantamount to hostage-taking in the current context. So we hope that this will be something that will be factored in as well. With regards to the attack on the data, on the fatalities, the use of OCHA in this report reflects similar incorrect interpretations of what OCHA is saying. OCHA has released a statement that it says that it's not reducing its numbers. It's essentially just trying to verify in a close as possible a way the actual people that's been killed. They are not revising their numbers down. What they're saying is the numbers remain the same, and that until the verification is complete, that their statistics remain. I think the best thing for the court...
All right, so that's Zane Dango speaking to international media. He, of course, is the Director General of the International Relations Department here at home. Really, if you like, giving a rebuttal to some of the representations made by Israel, who are responding to South Africa's genocidal intent case unfolding at the ICJ. We're expecting some kind of outcome, by the way, from the court sometime next week, and hopefully in some way it moves us forward in trying to resolve this incredibly protracted conflict.